All right, so we're working our way through this section, 10b through 12, and we're discussing this devolution of the false teachers into their most basic animal instincts. They're this way because they're just bold and arrogant. They're not afraid to heap abuse on celestial beings because they care more about their will and seeing things done their way than Christ. And they will use people to get to it. And they, in fact, if you're going to use lesser beings, why not use greater beings? So they heap abuse on celestial beings. This is what Jude has already talked about. We talked about this last week. It's the same language as Jude, but it's obviously used for a different purpose because Jude uses it for Michael versus the devil in the Testament of Moses. Peter ignores all of that because there's no devil in what he's discussing. The false prophets, well, the false teachers, the heretical apostates, as I've called them, are the devilish characters. So Peter doesn't need to bring the devil into any of this. So the celestial beings themselves, we talked about last week, they show great character because they don't actually turn around and make demands on God or of themselves of saying, hey, they insulted me, I want vengeance or something. They have every right to do that, but they don't immediately take and attack people back for attacking them. And so they're much more righteous than the people attacking them. We talked about the fact that in an honor-shame culture, if somebody attacks your honor, you're supposed to attack back in defense of your honor. And if you don't, you deserve to lose your honor. Peter is using this language mixed in with Judaism to basically refer to turning the other cheek. When somebody insults you personally is what turning the other cheek is about. It is not about when somebody just attacks you. You have no responsibility or right to defend yourself. This is not about somebody attacking you in an alley and saying, give me your wallet, and saying, okay, I'll just turn the other cheek. You should give them your wallet because it's probably not worth being attacked about. But if somebody breaks into your home, you have every right to defend yourself. Turning the other cheek is not about that. Turning the other cheek is about when you're being personally insulted. Just take the insult and invite them to keep on insulting you so that they show their character while you're showing yours. And people can see the juxtaposition, the contrast between them both. And the same thing is going on here. The celestial counsel of God is like accepting the insult. They're not attacking back, and they're showing themselves to have more honor than the slandering heretical apostates. Even though they have every right to have the expectation of saying, I should be able to defend my honor against these puny humans. They don't. And that's actually an important part of what Peter's trying to tell us. Even if you have the right, you should exercise it in such a way that God's honor is your first priority. You're thinking about God's kingdom, you're thinking about his rule, and you're actually applying wisdom to your situations. And a person who just immediately says, well, I have a right and I expect to get my way isn't a very wise person, isn't a very thoughtful, intelligent person. And those type of people are descending into their most base animal instincts as the heretical apostates. So we're going to be in verse 12 today. It says, these people blaspheme in matters they do not understand. They're like unreasoning animals, creatures of instinct, born only to be caught and destroyed. Like animals, they too will perish. So Peter's basic point is that they're wrong to slander celestials while affirming the judgment they deny. These heretical apostates denying the judgment is actually going to be their end. They're going to perish in the judgment they don't think is going to happen. Now, about verse 12, the Greek sentence order is slightly different. This is an NIV translation. And so we're going to, I think I've put them on the slides in this order, which would read in Greek, but these are like unreasoning animals, creatures of instinct, born only to be caught and destroyed, blaspheming in matters they do not understand. Like animals, they too will perish. So you can see some things are just rearranged in the Greek. Now, Greek word order doesn't matter all that much. So it's not the most important thing, but I think it will help to flow better going through it in this order. Like unreasoning animals, creatures of instinct. So if what I've highlighted up here as I go through these slides are out of order, then what's written up here, it's because I'm following this order to walk through it. He's getting his language from Jude verse 10. These people slander whatever they do not understand, and the very things they do understand by instinct as irrational animals will destroy them. And so, what connection points here? Slandering whatever they do not understand. Peter uses that phrase. Where Jude says they're irrational, Peter says they're unreasoning animals. Jude says they function by instinct. Peter calls them creatures of instinct. And in the end, Jude says they will be destroyed. Peter says they'll be caught and destroyed. The caught language is what happens when you have wild animals. You catch wild animals. You catch unruly animals, even if they're supposed to be domesticated. And so the idea is Peter's leaning into his animalistic language, and he alters Jude's language to help him emphasize that these people are basically animals, and they're going to have the same end you expect animals to have. So that's what we're going to discuss here. Jude's description of his antinomian apostates is designed to point out that what they are presently like. Peter's language is used to emphasize the end of the heretical apostates. Peter's language is describing they're like animals, but here's the end that they're going to make. And so he alters and adapts the language to focus on the end consequences of the heretical apostates, because that's what they're theologically denying. So by affirming that this is going to be their end, Peter is defending the return of Christ and the judgment that will come with his return. He's doing all of this, it's all in his mind. So we have to keep it all in our minds to understand this verse as he goes through it. So the final eschatological ending the heretical apostates, deny will even happen is going to overtake them, because they're like unreasoning animals. Instead of realizing that 2 plus 2 equals 4, they think, well, if 2 plus 2 equals 5, all that matters is I say it equals 5. And I think this is an important point of conversation, because that's what a lot of people think these days. They attack mathematics, and maybe you've heard these arguments that you can't trust mathematics because they were a creation of Indo-European, and even if they go back to Greek people, like Pythagoras or something, it's like, well, they were still white people, and so it's just them out farming their white culture to the rest of the world. I was like, no, it's an objective fact. We all live under the reality that 2 plus 2 equals 4. It doesn't matter which group formalized it into an academic discipline and passed it along to later generations. And to think otherwise makes you an unreasoning animal. And if you cannot agree with simple statements like 2 plus 2 equals 4, and you have to demand that it can mean 5, it can mean 6, it can mean anything you want it to mean, there's no talking to you. There's no arguing with you. There's no influencing you with the truth of God, because all that matters is your truth, and your truth can be anything it wants to be. But that's not true. That's objectively not true. And so here, the heretical apostates, they're like, well, we just don't think judgment's going to happen. We think you guys made it up. And Peter's point is, in effect, to say, we didn't make it up. We've covered that in chapter 1. You guys are wrong. And in fact, you're so wrong, you're basically devolving into animals. Your behavior is animalistic. And all of this description of animal-like tendencies is to ultimately get them to the end of saying, and you'll suffer the same fate as animals if, the implied point, if you choose to go on acting like animals. The implication is you don't have to do that. You can turn and actually stop being an animal. So these people are like unreasoning animals. These people, obviously the heretical apostates. What are they like? They're like unreasoning animals. And if you go back to 5th, 6th century Greek philosophers and how they thought, the argument has been going on for a long time of whether animals are rational or irrational. And if they're irrational, can they be killed? Can they be ill-treated? Are they on the same level of humans? I mean, it's like Greenpeace and PETA and animal rights activists today Those conversations have been going on for no less than 500 years in Greek culture. Peter is probably writing to a Greek dominant set of churches. And so he seems to be tapping into a lot of the same conversation. So let's talk a little bit about what the Greeks were saying. Aristotle, later Epicureans and Stoics who followed Aristotle's example in this thing about animals, came down on the side that because they are irrational animals, justice was unimportant to them and therefore could be denied them. An animal cannot defend himself in court. So he doesn't need a lawyer. He doesn't need somebody to say, well, the animal gored somebody, the ox harmed somebody, right? Then this is part of the Torah. This is part of the law. What happens if an ox gets out and attacks somebody? And says, well, what are the basic point is, what are the stipulations of him getting out? Was it neglect on the side of the owner? Did the owner do everything that they can and the ox still got out? You have to judge the situation. And this is kind of being more broad in saying no animals can defend themselves because they're not rational creatures. So we don't have to treat them the same way that we treat people. By calling them irrational animals, Peter's setting up the idea that they can be justly destroyed. He's not saying that justice can be denied to the heretical apostates. He's saying that because they're like irrational animals, their destruction, their slaughtering like an unreasoning animal used for sacrifice is not that far off of an idea. And he's just trying to make the point that judgment's going to happen for them because of their behavior. So they should alter their behavior, alter their allegiance to God to actually be allegiance, not rebellion. So by calling his opponents irrational, he's defending the honor of Christianity and its doctrine against their slanderous charges. So he's not saying it's not Christianity, it's not our beliefs in judgment and in Christ returning that's irrational. He's very subtly hinting it's you guys who are the irrational ones. And if you guys are like irrational animals, what does that say about your ideas and your teachings? So he's pointing all of that out. Now, they're born only to be caught and destroyed. That's a simple Greek axiomatic idea about all animals. They're not to be considered on the same level of humans. They don't know that they're going to die. Therefore, they don't consider any afterlife concepts. The afterlife is not a thing for animals. They don't consider death because they just don't know that they're going to die. Only humans do this.
No proof they'll be in heaven.
Yeah, there's no proof about that whatsoever. And only humans, I mean, when you talk about distinctions between animals and humans, one of the major things is we actually not only have a capacity to think long term about survival and make decisions that are going to help us survive long term, we actually think beyond our own lifetimes. We actually think about the underworld, the netherworld, all these cultural ideas of heaven and hell throughout the ages. There is, in fact, and this is a simple anthropological point, there is not one human culture that has ever existed on record that we do not have some account of an afterlife for. All humans, one thing that unites all humans, regardless of space and time, is that they have to consider things about the afterlife. Why? You have to start thinking about that. What makes us different than animals? This is one thing.
Cognitive thought.
I love cognitive thought. And thinking about life and death is like the ultimate long-term thinking. And we want our short-term thinking to be, we want it to be submitted to long-term thinking. You want to make middle to long-term goals, decisions, and ideas that are going to benefit the person you're going to be and the life you're going to live in 5 years. You know, the person you are today, you're not today because of the decisions you made today. You're the person you are today because of the decisions you made 5 years ago, the decisions you made 10 years ago, the decisions you made 15, 20 years ago. And the person you're going to be in 2030 is based on the decisions you're going to make now in 2025. It's too late to think about them when you get to 2030. But as we're going to see with heretical apostates, they're only thinking about the present. They're only thinking about their immediate desires. And what makes them animalistic is they're not thinking about the future. That's the idea of that Peter is getting at here. All right, so I've already said this. They're not thinking about what's going to happen when they die and when they face judgment. That's why I bring up Peter's not thinking about the afterlife here. He doesn't bring that up explicitly. But here, he's thinking about final judgment at the end, which is not necessarily when we die. It's when Christ returns. They're not thinking about these long-term things. They consider themselves above such divine brutality. Oh, God's so merciful, he would never actually judge sin. That's exactly what God does. The whole point of forgiveness through the crucifixion of the Messiah is because he took sin seriously. And if you don't accept the reality of his atonement on that cross in the flesh of Christ, his divine brutality, his divine justice and judgment against your sin will have to come out eventually. It can be delayed. It cannot be forgotten. It cannot be stopped. It has to happen somewhere. So,
universalism.
Yeah, they think it's not going to happen to them. So they're thinking like animals. And so the metaphor that Peter's going with here works. They're living with no regard to the consequences of their actions, so they're taking whatever actions they wish, whenever they wish. The result of such living in God's universe is to be captured and slaughtered like an animal who never saw it coming. And that's probably the unspoken reality of what this is. Animals who can't think 5 minutes ahead of time, let alone about the afterlife, let alone about the end of time and stuff. So they're living for immediate survival. They're kind of in a perpetual state of fight or flight unless there's no immediate threat around them. Then they just think about eating and surviving and stuff. But,
Peter uses that word, instinct, doesn't he?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's a creature of instinct.
Right.
And so
That's how God made them.
And so they're not thinking about it. And humans are supposed to be above this, but they're not.
Some of them.
I reference this. I got robbed by a sweet old lady on a cart. You know what that's from? It's Dumb and Dumber.
Oh.
It's very early in Dumb and Dumber where Lloyd, Jim Carrey's character, says, he's like, I'm going to go out for stuff. He and Harry have both, he and Harry have both been fired. So there's like, well, don't just get the essentials. This is the last of our dough. He's like, well, what do I look like? And then it cuts to the next scene, and he's got beer, like 2 cases of beer or something like that. But he's also got all these toys and this giant novelty hat and stuff. And he's like, he's not thinking about the fact that in 10 minutes he's going to be hungry again, and he doesn't have any money to buy food now. And then he sees like a paper, and he wants something on the paper, but he doesn't have change for $1. This lady goes by on the scooter, and she's like, "Excuse me, little old lady." I said, "Do you have change for $1?" She said, "No, I'm sorry." I said, "Oh, well, can you wait here and watch my things while I go get change?" And she says, "Sure." And he's like, "Thanks." And he's about to walk away, and then he talks without thinking, and he's like, I guess it's true what they say. Old people, although slow and dangerous behind the wheel, really can provide a valuable contribution to society. And he smiles and he walks off, and then you see her face change. She's like this, and you just hear he's off screen, you just hear, "Don't you go dying on me." And then it cuts to him walking into the apartment, slamming the door, and he's lost all of his stuff. And he's like, Harry's, "Where's the booze?" "I got robbed by a sweet old lady on a cart, and I didn't even see it coming."
Yeah.
It's like, when you don't think about things, your actions, you're dumb, and whether or not anybody's dumber is irrelevant. You're responsible for your own choices. And I put this picture up here because this isn't exactly the point, but I like making this point because it's very important, especially in our cultures today. You want to grow at least beyond being a parrot. What do I mean by that? Any guesses? Any thoughts? When I say parroting?
Actions speak louder than words.
Very true. It's related to that.
Parroting things you don't understand or haven't understood and researched.
And okay, good. So you're not thinking for yourself. You're just repeating what somebody else says. Now, I do think sometimes that's a necessary step in the learning process. And we can be more intellectually honest about it, saying, I'm kind of reading and learning about this thing. I'm trying to think it through. Here's who I've read. Here's what he says about that. Here's what she says about that. Here's what this commentator says. But if you haven't really weighed different options, at least be honest of saying, I don't really know where I come down on that, but I know so-and-so says this, so I'm repeating this. What do you think? And invite the other person in. Then you have to weigh different distinctive options so that you don't just repeat them.
At this age, I'm parroting so I can simply remember what I'm doing.
That's not parroting. That's just good memory exercises. Yeah. That kind of parroting is not bad. Repetition is the key to learning. And
remembering in my case.
And so this is not learning, though. This is not internalizing it for yourself. Right. And the reason I bring this up in times like this, the reason I think of it in times like this, one, you look around in moments like this, you don't have politicians and leaders and thinkers who think for themselves.
Right.
Those are very rare. And you want to find them and you want to listen to people who actually think and weigh options for themselves. But a lot of the times when you get people out in public today speaking or with a platform, all they're doing is repeating the talking points they're told to by the people that pay the bills. And you don't want to listen to them because they're just a parrot for the funding. What you want is somebody who says, this is what I think, this is where I come down. If you if you believe as I do, and you want to give or something, it's an optional thing, right? But it also happens with religious leaders. This is why I don't just, teach what Baptists say. I don't repeat to you Baptist talking points just because we're in a Baptist church. I delve into things and try and make you think through things that historically Baptists don't either pay any attention to, or when they do, it's often just the teacher is a parrot who, instead of actually learning it for themselves, they just say whatever's written in their book. They say whatever the Baptist talking point is. And if that's going to be a step in the learning process, fine. As long as the teacher is just admitting that this is as far as they've come yet. And so they don't really know and they're learning and repeating what they're learning. You should be intellectually honest about that wherever you are in the process. But the point is if you're really going to grow beyond an animalistic parroting of talking points, it's going to take more time in private. You're going to have to do a lot more work, thinking it through, developing it, and then coming down on where you believe and why you believe it, and repeating it in your own words, which is like a thing they teach young kids. Okay, you're going to write this, you're going to summarize this in your own words. It's like you have to be able to take in what they said and what they meant, and then repeat it and regurgitate it back yourself. And just summarizing and repeating in your own words as an elementary school student is like the first step in learning. But if you don't grow beyond it, you'll never be more than a parrot. You have to think through, okay, this is what they said. I'm going to repeat what they said, but what do I think about what they said, and why do I think that?
Isn't it Peter that tells us to do that exact thing?
I'm not sure. In what place? In what place? I mean, what verse are you thinking? Do you?
Well, there's that memory thing again.
Well, if you remember the phrasing,
to know what you believe and why you believe it.
I don't know if it gets phrased
That's
like that.
Paraphrase.
If you come over,
are you talking about when he says know what you believe so that you can give a defense at any time?
There you go.
Oh, okay. Always be ready to give an answer of those who ask. Yeah, I got you. Hey, so yeah, it would be how do you ready yourself to give a defense?
Right.
How do you do that? Peter's not merely talking in a legal sense there for when you're hauled in front of a magistrate for it. Right. He's thinking just on the day-to-day, whether it's something big like that or somebody next door to you just ask, why do you even go to church and stuff? Well, what are you going to tell them? I remember the first time that I was, well, not the first time, but the first time I was officially on staff at my first church. I'm sitting in my office, and I had the middle office. Right outside my office was the secretary who was like the first line of defense of dealing with phone calls. And one day she gets a phone call, or the phone rings, she answers, and I guess she was having a conversation with somebody about what the church believed. But she said, well, we believe that Jesus died on the cross, and That was it. That's all she said. And at this point, I think of the words of Sherlock in the BBC Cumberbatch adaptation, where Watson says, "This woman's dead," and he says, "Perfectly sound analysis, though I was hoping you would go deeper." And I'm like, look, I'm not disagreeing with you that Jesus died on a cross, but can you give a gospel presentation that actually goes beyond that?
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe the life and work of Christ in such a way where you're not just parroting the Baptist talking points of focusing on the cross? Can you go beyond it to his resurrection? Can you explain the resurrection?
You gotta sell it.
I'm reading this, as I mentioned last week, I'm reading the biography of Eric Metaxas on Luther, Martin Luther, and, the reason I respect Martin Luther so much, although I disagree with him on a lot of details, is just because he never did anything without thinking it through. He tried not to. The older he got, it seems like he got more comfortable with acting a little more rashly. But, when he nailed the 95 Theses to the door at the Church of Wittenberg, he didn't intend to start anything. The only thing he intended to start was, they're written in Latin, and nobody could read Latin, even though it was like a public bulletin board. Only the priestly class could read Latin. So he's like just saying, hey, priests, when you see this is 95 things that I would like to talk about and have a debate on and discuss. That's all. That's all he was trying to do. And when things start going beyond his control and he has to play pastor to people who are now trying to think for themselves, which is a great thing, he never wanted to give people easy answers. He never wanted to just parrot what they wanted to hear. He never wanted to parrot talking points. He always tried to slow down the community and saying, look, I'm glad you're doing this, but I need to think this through. I need to think about not just what is right, but how we're going to do what is right. And I really respect that about him, because not every reformer did that, even in his own lifetime. So my point, in addition to Peter's point, is you don't want to be an animal. And if you're going to be an animal, don't be a parrot. Don't just repeat what you've heard other people say. Think about what you've heard other people say. Even me, don't repeat what I say just because I've said it. Think through what I and other people say, and think through the scriptures for yourselves and come to your own conclusions. We're not always going to agree on the details. But like Peter and these heretical apostates, we don't need to agree on the details. We need to agree on the basics. And the basics are, this is the reality about Christ. But even those, you shouldn't just parrot them. That's why I don't like really gospel presentations, most of the ones in the 20th century, that say, oh, here's the three laws of the three spiritual laws, or, anything. And they don't teach the gospel and sharing the gospel. They teach the three spiritual laws, or, whatever. And they say, here's how you repeat this. And they call it a gospel presentation. A lot of the times you'll find in those things that they don't really say anything about Jesus. And so they're not really talking about the gospel. They're talking about you. They're talking about your sin problem. And they're addenduming Jesus on as the solution to your sin problem. And it's like, nope, not a gospel presentation if you do that. And you might just be a parrot. I want you to grow beyond being a parrot. I want you to mature beyond being an animal. I want you to be a real, true person who thrives and thinks for themselves, because God wants you to be that mature. He wants to hand over responsibility to you. And if you're not going to be responsible enough to think through ideas for yourself, however slowly you need to, across however much time it takes you, don't expect God to trust you with very important things in His kingdom when He returns. Okay? Now, one way that I would summarize this for another Jim Carrey movie is that this whole idea of judgment is to say, I'm getting what I deserved, I'm reaping what I sow, here is pretty much Peter's point. When the heretical apostates are thinking about judgment, Peter's point is in this scene from Liar, Liar. He's like laying on the floor. He doesn't know that he can't tell a lie. He's like, what is happening to me? I'm getting what I deserved. I'm reaping what I'm sowed. And then that's when he covers his mouth and stuff. It's like, that's the point. The heretical apostates are going to get what they deserve. We all are. Judgment is not a negotiable aspect. What is negotiable is whether you face the full brunt of your own judgment or whether you let Christ, who has already faced it, do that. But to those who don't like Jesus, they blaspheme in matters they don't understand. So this is the legal charge against the heretical apostates. It's ultimately what they're going to be condemned for, barring any repentance. He's saying this not to say you have no hope, but to point out to them your only hope is to actually deal with this. So they slander celestials, and undermine the God who established the universe according to the celestial strength and power greater than that of humans. Read Psalm 8. To insult celestials as weaker than mere humans when God has made them stronger is to insult the celestial king who gave them power over humanity. They're above humanity, they're beyond humanity, and they just don't get it. So really this phrase here is just what we talked about last week. So I got one slide on it, and I would refer you to last week's because it's just another way of saying the same thing. And now, like animals, they too will perish. You've seen Parks and Rec. They're having a picnic. Ron comes up with a pig. Okay, everybody, let's start the barbecue. Oh, hey, little guy, what are you doing? Oh, no. Everyone, meet your meat. And so it's like that. Like animals, they too will perish. And if you've seen the episode, you know eventually Ron does storm off, doesn't cook anything, but then later on he feeds them the pig Tom. This is not a statement of God giving them life only so that he could throw them into hell in a Calvinistic sense. All right? This is not that. It is a continuation of metaphorical language describing them as animals. Animals, in broad Greek description, are born to be caught and killed by humanity according to our needs. Peter's using that valid description to refer to their valid ending, assuming they don't actually do anything with their choices. He is not giving us an ontological reality about God's pre-creation sovereign decisions. He's just not doing that. A lot of people will just see any time that there's any notion of a predestined concept, they just automatically assume God made the decisions. But the heretical apostates are responsible here. They're described as animals. They can do something about that. They can rise above their animalistic instincts and desires. Those instincts, those desires, kind of starting in verse 13, they'll be paid back with harm for the harm that they have done. Their idea of pleasure is to carouse in broad daylight. They are blots and blemishes, reveling in their pleasures while they feast with you. With eyes full of adultery, they never stop sinning. They seduce the unstable. They're experts in greed, an accursed brood. They've left the straight way and wandered off to follow the way of Balaam, son of Bezor, who loved the wages of wickedness. But he was rebuked for his wrongdoing by a donkey, an animal without speech, who spoke with a human voice and restrained the prophet's madness. And so he's going to use the Balaam instance of the donkey being given human intelligence to talk to Balaam as an example of saying, act like an animal, you'll get treated like an animal. And if you devolve into an animal, even God will use an animal to rebuke you if you're going to lower and debase yourself that way. I don't really want to get into verse 13 today. I want to just stop there, and if you have any questions over the next 6 or 7 minutes, I just don't think getting beyond verse 13 today will work. So any questions on anything here?
Confirmation that animals were provided for our benefit.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly, God gave us authority over them.
Right.
We're not supposed to just go around indiscriminately slaughtering them,
Right.
Obviously.
Right.
So when I was growing up, right outside our neighborhood, across the street, was farmland for cattle. Now it's factory stuff, but back in the 90s, it was farmland. And we went to the slaughterhouse one day on a field trip in elementary school.
What a field trip.
And
Wow.
I don't think it was middle school. I think it was like
Texas.
sixth grade. Yeah, I am from Texas, right? And so I remember what the guy at the slaughterhouse said. It's like, look, these cows have a great life. They only ever have one bad day.
Right.
They're raised for cattle. They're raised for meat.
Right.
And so they have a great life. They never go hungry. They never have a problem. Nobody ever attacks them. Then they have one bad day and they don't even know it.
And especially when it comes to beef or cattle in general, almost every single part of that animal is used in making something.
Yeah.
I mean, from medicines to cosmetics and everything in between.
That's true. We're not doing it for the sake of being cruel. We're exercising our authority over the animals and coming to valid uses just beyond having them alive.
Right.
And the Bible gives us permission to do this.
Right. And that's why I have an issue with people that take it to the extreme.
Yeah. People who think that animals are basically people and should have all the same rights as people.
And have actually assigned them humanistic character.
Yeah, I get it. There are things that animals have in common with people.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, they're not people. They're not image bearers. They should not be treated exactly the same. That doesn't mean you treat them with cruelty.
Right.
You can treat lesser beings with kindness and love and respect, whether they're your pets or whether you're raising them for slaughter.
You have a stewardship responsibility.
Yes, absolutely. And so maybe that's one way to say it. These heretical apostates are not stewarding anyone. They're not fulfilling their stewardess responsibility. They're treating people like cattle, like animals to be used for their own pleasure. And Peter's point is saying, you guys are the real animals. Maybe that's one way that we could actually say it throughout this point.
And there may be some sort of retribution or punishment for mistreating. I mean, they are creation of God, right? They're a creature of God. And when you don't steward properly, there is an accountability for that.
I agree. I just don't find that, raising animals for slaughter is a problem.
Right.
I think that's actually a valid thing humans are allowed to do in the Bible.
Right, absolutely.
Especially outside of Eden. Now, it won't need to be that way at the return of Jesus, but it is now. And I like your point. Don't waste any parts of the animals. Right. Use every bit of it because it's giving its life. See, that's the thing. We don't have a sacrificial system officially, but we still sacrifice animals.
Right.
Not for atonement, but for food, which was actually more what the sacrifices were about, but also to make clothing, leather, boots. What other stuff comes from animal? Medicines, cosmetics, like I said, all sorts of things.
Food. I mean, they use it in making all sorts of food processes.
Yeah, and none of that's a problem in God's mind.
Right.
And you don't have to turn it into a cruel, sadistic torture of animals.
God sort of set the stage for that. Didn't he kill an animal to cover Adam and Eve?
Well, see, that's the thing. When I talked about that on Wednesday night, it doesn't say anything about it in an atonement process.
Right.
It's
for
everybody.
practical.
Everybody looks at that as if God's instituting the sacrificial system.
No.
But what he's doing there is just saying, even before he's declared that humanity has to leave, he's providing for the fact that a bunch of leaves is not going to help you outside of this garden. You need better clothing for your own protection. And so he graciously provides what they need before he kicks them out of the garden.
Which tells us that animals can be used both for practical purposes and sacrificial.
That's true. It doesn't say anything about them eating that animal. It was for clothing purposes because they're going to now. We're living in a subpar world.
Right.
The world is not what it could be because we rebelled against the world's creator. We rebelled against his system and put ourselves above him in our own thinking, at least. And so we're getting the world that we deserve. Actually, we're not getting the world we deserve in a very strict sense. We're getting the world we chose, while God also responded and said, I'm still not going to just outright destroy you. I will save you. I will seek to save you. And so we're living in a world that's below where it could be, where animals are now paying a consequential price for it, the same as any of us. But their consequential prices are not the same because they're not image bearers. They will die like the rest of creation. They will suffer when they live through life, and they will have difficulties, but they can't rise above it. If humanity doesn't help them rise above it, they don't have a chance, and they'll just die in the end anyways. All right, get out of here. Be gone with you.